Huns Empire hanging over Rome, including the ruins of Hesperia and quite still capable Byzantium, occupying lands east of the Rhine, north of the Danube to the Baltic, the basins of the Dnieper and Don, one of the greatest historical ghosts. But who were the Huns, already by the beginning of the 6th century turned into a terrible fairy tale? The official history did not give a precise answer to this question, attributing the Huns to the Ugrians, to the Germans, to the Turks. Alternative history gave mutually exclusive answers, depending on who composed it. So, first of all, who are the Huns? And if you start from the beginning, they're Mongols. The tribal union Hunnu ruled in Mongolia at the turn of the Old and New Era. Even then it was multi-ethnic, including Iranian, Scythian, Proto-Mongolian, Tungus, Manchu tribes, but in this by now the consensus has been reached with the predominance of the Turkic element. Moreover, it is now believed that the core of the Hunnu Union was formed by Proto-Turkic tribes, from which all other Turks originated. That is, it was during the Hunnu era that the Great Steppe, the western, central, and to some extent even the eastern part of which had previously been inhabited by Iranian tribes, began to be filled with Turks. Long before the Huns were known in Europe, they, spreading their language and to a certain extent their racial type, Mongoloid, had reached the Volga River, spreading westward. At the beginning of the new era, the Hunnus going off into the sunset with their herds became a trend, as things were getting worse in the east. The history of the Huns in Mongolia ended with a crushing defeat at the hands of the Chinese, who were enraged by the raids and organized a great massacre in the steppe. Thus, the Huns are Mongols but still unfinished, unsuccessful and unsuccessful, although for some time the impression was different. Iranian and Ugrian tribes of the Great Steppe could not give the fleeing Huns a worthy resistance, and the retreat became a conquest. Having suffered defeat on the battlefield, another horde was subdued, joining the Hun horde, and gradually diluting it. Paleogenetic studies have shown that by the time of the Danube, Mongoloids and Europeans among the Huns was about equally. Most likely, one of the Scythian languages was native for half of the fighters of the alliance. Turks, Proto-Mongols, Ugrians, Tungus were already a minority, and the ranks of Indo-Europeans began to be replenished with Slavs, Dacians, and Germans. And from that moment the question, who are the Huns, lost its meaning. The Huns were a horde, a multitude of columns of migrating peoples, engaged mainly in cattle breeding, both nomadic and semi-nomadic, the latter at that time included all Germanic and Slavic tribes, united only politically, by an agreement not to rob each other, and to attack others by united forces. This approach automatically turned the horde into an avalanche, demolishing everything on its way. Because everyone wanted to be a Hun, not to be robbed but to help rob others. A reasonable idea. The question about the Hunnic language is also inappropriate. Unlike the Mongols, the Huns left no literary monuments, documents, or inscriptions in general. It is difficult to speak of any Turkic trace left by the Huns in Europe, for it is buried under several layers of later raids of Turanians, Avars, and Bulgarians. It is believed, however, that the Huns, some Asian tribes settled in Pannonia, left a shallow trace in the genetics of the Hungarians. That is, it is pointless to puzzle over where the Huns disappeared to. Huns, as well as Hunnu, before that a political association, not a people. It is hardly possible to determine what nationality was the most famous of the leaders of the Hun horde, Attila. According to some very controversial data, he could be of Germanic origin. What language did Attila speak? Romans communicated with barbarians in Latin through interpreters. About the presence of some common, and even more so the state language of the Huns, nothing is known. Attila could have used several dialects. How can one rule a power without a common language? You can't. But the Huns had no power even in the form of a nomadic empire, common among later steppe people. Empire of the Huns, a set of tribes involved by the horde in collective action by terror or promises of booty. Moreover, the size of the empire on the map corresponds to the settlement of peoples at some point Huns subordinated. At some point, but not at the same time. Hardly Balts in the upper reaches of the Dnieper in general were aware of the existence of Attila, and certainly they did not send to the Danube neither tribute nor military contingents. As it is due to the horde, Huns' horde disintegrated after the first defeats. for the participants were united only by the hope to gain at the expense of those who were not part of the alliance. Failure meant the return of tribes to the former modest business stealing cattle from neighbors. Looking closely at the outlines of the Hunnish Empire and comparing it with the later empire of the Mongols, one can notice the main difference. If the Mongols managed to capture cultural centers in Central Asia, China, and Iran, the Huns owned only barbarian lands. They had nowhere to find the personnel to manage the conquered territory.